You are listening to WPHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk radio.
Reaching all the way back to 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition. Here is your host of Fate Radio, Kat Hobson.
Good evening and welcome to Paranormal... That's so wrong. Good evening. This is Kat Hobson, and welcome to Fate Magazine Radio here on WBHM Paranormal Talk Radio. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and I am so pleased that you're here. We have such a show lined up for you. My guest tonight is someone that I have talked to several times. I'm fortunate enough to consider her my friend, and her information is always every bit as great as her research. Before we get into that, I know that we have so many people who have been affected by this blizzard that is just rocking the Northeast and central U.S. as well. I hope that everyone listening is safe and warm, and that you have someone to be cuddly and snuggly with if that's your color Kool-Aid, because it always helps. And we also want to be letting people know that Denise Pridemore at the Paranormal Pride will not be airing tomorrow night. We will have archives, and she is actually going to be taking care of some tragic family business. When she is ready, she will make that known. But if you could please offer up positive energy, prayers, just send some love. Their family could use that right now. And I know that I am. I am so pleased tonight to welcome Mary A. Joyce. Mary is www.skyshipsovercashiers.com. That website, if you are not familiar with it, you're slack. Just kidding, but you really should check it out. There's so much information. When I started researching Antarctica, because I kept hearing so much about it, when I started developing a real vested interest in Bigfoot, ufology, all types of things, Mary was my go-to. And I was fortunate enough to be able to spend some time with her and her partner in crime, and it was just wonderful. They are some knowledgeable people, and they are into gaining this knowledge and sharing it with you. And Mary, welcome to Fate Radio.
Well, thank you. You must not be having bad weather, and we aren't either, so I guess everything's on our side tonight.
Well, I tell you what, that was something else.
Yeah, we have to tell your listeners that the last time we tried to connect, we both were having bad weather and power outages, and I was out without power for about 3 days, which makes it impossible to do these kind of communications. So we kind of gave up at that point and rescheduled.
Well, at some point in time, you have to just say, okay, you got me, to Mother Nature, and roll with that. So anyhow, she's left us alone this time. We're not having bad weather. It's just going to be cold tonight. Well, I much prefer being favored with no snow. Correct. So, well, other than freezing everything up there, we're pretty nippy here too. We're getting into the 20s, which for the deep south is really something else. But I know that there have been new UFO sightings up in your area. We always have UFO sightings up here. We don't always get them all, but we have a sky watcher up in Cashiers. Her name is Glennis Heenan. And ever since 2008, when we started this website, she has been really good about checking on the sky on a regular basis. And sometimes she just gets what we call ordinary UFOs scooting across the sky.
but she's gotten some phenomenal ones. We have some that I've never seen anywhere on the internet, and they're unexplainable. She got a series where there were 5 or 6 UFOs the same night, and they looked like big hunks of asteroids, except they weren't moving. They were just hovering in the air. They weren't illuminating from within, but there was some reflection from light on the ground. And, one kind of looked like a pine cone, but they all looked like they were asteroids instead of UFOs, and yet they clearly were UFOs. And among those that looked like the asteroids, there was one that looked like the old-fashioned kind of nutcracker, just the V-shaped, silver-looking cracker. I mean, things we just couldn't explain. And she's
never heard of those.
No, we hadn't either, and I haven't seen anything like it since we got those. And she's also gotten some phenomenal things, like at one time, the numbers 16, 19 appeared in the sky, and it was like, I don't know, I assume it's some kind of a holographic thing that the ships can do, and the numbers would appear in the sky, and then they would just kind of morph out, and then they showed up again a couple hours later. We certainly don't have great answers for these. We just have lots and lots of mysteries.
And questions that bother you so, I would think. Yes.
Well, we just keep looking and looking. And one of the things that she got, which I think you and your audience might be interested in, is one night this was about a year after she'd been seeing all these incredible things, and she went and stretched out one evening about 10:30 in her TV room where she could look out her window and see the sky, and she saw a UFO up there, which, was not a big deal to her anymore, and it didn't faze her. But then this beam of light came down from the UFO and hit the parking area next to her house, and she said it was about the diameter of a baseball, the diameter of this beam. And then suddenly she heard this whack on the side of the house, and she looked, and she was actually very fearful. But then she saw a hologram of Jesus that was about 35 feet tall, and it stayed there for at least 20 minutes. And there was movement to it. She's a hairdresser by profession, and she said that, the hair was soft, like it had just been washed, and it was blowing gently in the breeze. And she described, how he looked, and it was really quite an experience for her. And as far as I'm concerned, it was more memorable because she has not been raised Christian, though she certainly is a Christian now. But
that would do it.
Her mother was Jewish, so she was more exposed to that than anything. And it just was a mind-boggling experience. And the reason I mention her religious background is that sometimes people who are very religious will hope and wish and pray so much that they almost begin to manifest things in their own imagination. And this was so shocking to her and so unexpected that, it's something she'll never forget.
Well, I would imagine not. That's quite an unusual experience, especially if that's not something that I guess really matters to you at the time, and it just pops right up there in front of you. I would be taken aback.
I think anybody would. And her house is, it was completely encircled with very tall trees, and so she knew the height of her house, so that's why she was able to make a fairly accurate description of how tall this apparition was. And after that happened, I gave serious thought to the idea that many of the things like the visions of Fatima and Medjugorje, things that are made especially well known in the Catholic faith, you have to wonder if maybe those were also generated as hologram images. And one of the reasons that I have to consider that is the fact that when the young people at Fatima who could see this image in the sun, but if you were away from where they were standing, you couldn't see it. And that is like a hologram. When Glennis saw this apparition, she actually at one point moved to another window and she couldn't see it. And so that kind of reinforced the idea that it was a hologram projection that she was seeing. And I cannot begin to and would not attempt to explain holographs, but they use a laser beam and an image and they split it and use mirrors. And so with this beam coming down in the parking area and then this image appearing over in the trees, that is another aspect of holograms that, make it seem like that's what it was.
Well, I just find that fascinating because I have not had that experience. I see unusual movement in the skies all the time. I'm a hammock sitter, right? And I love being outside. So I watch during the day and I watch at night. And it's amazing sometimes what shows up.
Well, if you get anything good, I hope you have a camera close and shoot a picture our way.
I do have a camera with me almost all the time, and I have never yet been able to capture an image that I would feel comfortable sharing because, I shoot a Nikon D90. It's old school camera. I love it. I'm not changing cameras. But even with an absolutely fantastic lens on it, I cannot get a capture because most of the time things that I see, with one exception, have been very high elevations.
Well, I'll tell you what, even some of those where they're just almost like a small light in the sky, send me one of those because I can zero in on those and zoom in, and sometimes you get to see more things than you think you can.
I'll do that. We have a couple of questions for you already in chat, and if you're listening and you are not in our chat room, you missed half the show. Seriously, these people have fun. They're intelligent. They have great questions. Come join them at www.wbhm-.com, and you'll see a little live chat button you can click, and it'll take you right in. You can sign in with Facebook. You can sign in with Rumble Talk. You can just be a mystery guest. Whatever floats your boat. But are you up for a couple of questions?
Certainly. If they're too tough, I'll just whack them back in your direction.
Well, one of the people wants to know what got you into ufology. Why is this your passion? Well, not just this, but why are these anomalous topics your passion?
I guess there's multiple answers to that. Number one, during part of my career in the regular professional world, I worked for newspapers. And I was born with a huge curiosity. And the great thing about working for newspapers is you could, go and check out just about any kind of a story that you wanted to. And I continued that on with the website. So it's really the newspaper mentality being transferred to a website, situation. That's part of it. Curiosity is at the top of the list. Then for a while, I lived on Cocoa Beach in Florida, and I was right between Patrick Air Force Base and the Launch Center, or the Space Center. And I would see those launches, and sometimes we would see UFOs that would appear when the launches were happening. And when I lived in Florida, because it's so flat, I actually saw more UFOs down there than I see here. Because right now I'm wedged between two mountain ridges, and if you don't get right smack in the middle and look straight up, you might not see anything. So that got me started. And then the final part to answer the question is that in 2008, when we were inspired to start the website, the woman Glennis that I refer to as our sky watcher and cachers, she had never seen a UFO in her life, and she's lived in South Africa and London and Houston and someplace out in California. She never saw one until she moved to Cashers, and her first sighting was one night when she went downstairs to the kitchen to get, I guess, a snack, and the yard was really lit up, and she said, "That's brighter than the moon ought to be." And she went and looked, and there was a low hovering UFO illuminating her yard. And she lived at that point. She